So my skeptical mind, and that's just who I am, my skeptical mind goes to, well, yeah, of course, you've got this guy over here that's logical and reasonable, and you got this guy over here that's wearing a tinfoil hat. Of course the tinfoil hat guy's going to see a lot of stuff, right? He's like imagining it, or he's watched one too many sci-fi movies.
But it's used to help us frame hypotheses for UFO propulsion, power, stealth, weaponry.
Everything that we experience is very positive.
Sometimes the field of ufology has a short memory span.
We didn't know anything about the $22 million back then. We just kind of thought, well, this is, and I think that was the reason why they were looking for military-type people, because in the military, you work with whatever you got, no matter what the situation is, and you just kind of adapt and overcome.
What are you going to do with all this? You can't even take care of your own files and get them put into the current system, but yet you want to go collect other people's things. So what are you going to do with it? Who are you giving all this to?
It just really struck me about how the common thread seemed to be deception, but deception of a human nature. So that's what I started thinking, who would these folks be? I mean, then I started thinking about the intelligence agencies, what role they could play, and what would be their motivations for getting involved in ufology.
I'm not saying that because the gimbal is not a rotating flying saucer, that means that all the UFOs are false. Not at all. All I'm doing is I'm looking at this one case, these individual cases, and seeing if there's an explanation for those.
Welcome to UFO Classified, and happy Friday, my friends from all over the world. I hope that you are all staying safe and you're healthy and happy. I want to give a shout out to Mario, who just had his 35th wedding anniversary, and they say thank you for everything that you do for me, Mario. I also want to give a shout out to In the Field, Scott Brown, for all the beautiful graphics that he does for UFO Classified as well. Two amazing people that I'm proud to be friends with. And I want to thank all of my listeners and send Irv my love. I hope you are feeling better, Irv. You are very wonderful, and thank you for the beautiful Christmas card. I have so many great people in my life, and I'm hoping that you all have a happy and healthy holiday season. My guest this evening is Paul Smith, and we pre-recorded the interview earlier today as he had plans for the evening. Paul Smith is somebody that I met a couple years ago. He is retired major for the U.S. Army. He was a psychic spy for 7 years for the DoD's Stargate remote viewing program. He was a founder and former president of the nonprofit International Remote Viewing Association. He is the CEO of Remote Viewing Instructional Services, Incorporated. His book, Reading the Enemy's Mind, was also a Reader's Digest book bonus feature and Editor's Choice selection. He is the author of The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing and co-producer of the Learn Dowsing and Remote Perception Home Study courses. His PhD is from the University of Texas at Austin in philosophy of mind, consciousness, philosophy. He earned his BA at Brigham Young University right here in Utah and MS from the National Defense University, both in Middle East studies. So this is, he's an incredible man, and lots of good stuff to share with us on this pre-recorded interview. So I will look forward to playing this. I'll be chatting with you. And so here we have Paul Smith, who is also, I just have to add, has been a guest on Coast to Coast, the History Channel, Travel Channel, Discovery, and was on Rob Lowe's series, The Lowe Files. So this is going to be a great interview. Stick around, and here comes the interview.
As good as I'm going to sound anyway.
No, trust me, and with my audio skills, it's never a dull moment. But I want to thank you so much for coming on UFO Classified tonight. I had the pleasure of meeting you at a conference in St. George, the Utah UFO Festival, and that was a great treat just to spend time with you.
Wait a minute. Let's get our locations correct. It was in Cedar City.
Well, okay, you busted me.
Yeah, St. George is okay, but but I have to defend my homeland here, you know? Cedar City's a great place.
Cedar City, St. George is just on my mind. I don't know why. But yeah, that was really a wonderful, Nate did such a great job with organizing that. And there were so many wonderful people from all over the country that were at that event. And it was really fun for me to get to talk to you because you are held in such high regard in the remote viewing community. And at that time, you were kind enough to give me a copy of your book, The Secret Military Remote Perception Skill Anyone Can Learn, The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. And I have found quotes in this book that I absolutely love. And I think the one cool thing about you is you are very down to earth, and you talk a lot about different remote viewers and some of the ways that they've gone out on limbs and talking about things that truly at the end of the day cannot be verified. And I like that grounded approach that you have to this topic, to remote viewing. And all of that, I think we could all learn from your example.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't see much value in making claims that you can't back up. I mean, there's a lot of people who do that, and I think integrity demands that we try and be as honest as we can. People will tend to believe the things we say more if they trust us to be as honest as we can be. And unfortunately, in both the remote viewing and the UFO, UAP fields, a lot of people just get so excited about throwing their imaginations into it that then people don't even trust the stuff they say that might actually be true. You know, so I think maintaining our integrity is extremely important when we're dealing with things that are pretty, well, otherworldly or out of this world, if you will. You know.
Absolutely, and I really do admire that about you, and I also admire the fact that you are an artist.
Oh.
And you've got to tell me a little bit about this, because I heard your interview with Jeffrey Mishlove, a couple of them, and you know, at the tail end of one of the interviews, you have your beautiful artwork in the back, and it reminds me a lot. My father is an artist as well, and it reminds me a lot of what he painted back in the 60s and early 70s.
Yeah, so the interesting thing is there are, well, I've got a lot of interests, but three of my enduring interests started out before I ever was in kindergarten. And I was 4. I was very much into drawing things. I was very much into guns, and I was very much into military-related stuff. I found all of that fascinating. And so I would often combine those various things, you know, the art part and the military part and the guns part. In fact, my parents always talked about an art project that my kindergarten teacher gave me. She said, "Okay, everybody, we're going to do a Halloween-themed drawing. And Paul, I don't want you to put any guns or military stuff in it." And so I went ahead and drew a battleship, and I lined the rail with pumpkins.
That is fantastic.
So, but yeah, I took every art class that my junior high and high school offered. And then I started off majoring in art at BYU. My big interest back then was landscape watercolor. And I still love that. I'm getting back into it after not having really done it seriously for 40 years. And I majored in art until the problem was, of course, that I had other interests. By then I was very interested in Middle Eastern subjects, and so I took a bunch of Hebrew. They didn't offer Arabic, or I'd have taken that. Middle Eastern classes and stuff. So my art studies also somewhat suffered. And I did illustrate some botany books, a field guide to fossils and a basic textbook for botanical plant science and stuff. So I still had kind of a hand in that, but I went on a Mormon mission to Switzerland and came back and got married and joined the army. And so I kind of left art behind for the most part until, you know, fairly recently. I did have a phase when I was in the military remote viewing program in what's come to be known as Stargate, and where I got into oil painting, and I did a lot of what was called cosmic art. You probably heard the interview I did with Mishlove where I talked about that, and is actually in a way remote viewing that got me into that. I had always been fascinated by surrealism, by these kind of dream quality kind of paintings that seem to transcend the earthly sort of existence. But surrealism always had this kind of nightmare edge to it. And so I was kind of disturbed by that, but there was something about it that I really liked. And then, interestingly, of course, learning remote viewing, I'm learning from the legendary Ingo Swann. He's the one that taught us how to do what we do now in remote viewing. And he was an artist first before he was a remote viewing developer and instructor. And his art, the kind of art he did, was exactly the kind of art that I had wanted to do but didn't have a name or an understanding of until I saw it on his wall. And he called it cosmic art, and that was it. It was kind of like space art meets the positive side of surrealism, meets just the mysteries of the universe in a way. And I totally fell in love with that. And I did a bunch of paintings. So about that time, my first wife moved out, and I was left home as the single parent with 3 little kids. And as kind of a distraction or therapy, I started oil painting late at night. So between 11 at night and 2 in the morning, I would paint in one of the upstairs rooms we had. And most of the paintings I have right now, the oil paintings, kind of come from that era. So yeah, I was kind of expressing in an artistic way the sorts of feelings and ambiance that I felt like I was encountering in the remote viewing work.
And isn't that fascinating? I was never much of an artist. I was a vocalist by training, and I studied at the University of Utah, and and I sang in bands for a long, long time. But I picked up painting about 6 or 7 years ago, and there's something that is just so therapeutic and everything. That's about the time when I really got involved in the UFO research, and all of my paintings were focused on clouds and skies, and it was for me also very therapeutic. And I look back at all of that, and I'm glad that I have that kind of a little time capsule of what I was feeling emotionally, and then how I put that on canvas. It's very fascinating.
There's actually kind of a crosswalk between this and your main topic for your podcast here. Interestingly, I had an online conversation with some folks that had a UFO encounter fairly recently down in the St. George area. I won't go into details about that. That may come out in some other kind of publication or whatever. But one of the things I told them is what you need to do is, and there were 2 people who were witnessers here. I said, you need to, separate from each other, independently of each other, make sketches of what this thing was that you saw, and make it from different perspectives, because the object moved and changed its orientation towards them. Said make it from different perspectives, and don't look at each other's work until after you're both done, because you don't want to influence each other's perspective on it, each other's memories of it. And do that because that's another way of capturing information. We get all these verbal reports, but words don't always capture what it is you experience. And in fact, you can much more quickly, and sometimes sketching something, express what it was that you saw much better than you can verbally. And people say, oh, I'm not an artist. You don't have to be an artist. You do the best you can, and what you're trying to do is just represent the shape, maybe the orientation, the perspective, whatever, to the best of your ability. And that alone is still invaluable, even if it isn't aesthetically pleasing or anything. We don't care about that. What we care about is capturing the information.
Absolutely. And that is a great thing to do. It is very, very important with regard to especially UFO sightings. And that's interesting that they had a sighting down in that area. So that would be, there's lots going on, especially in Utah. Utah's a very interesting place, and I want to talk a little bit, about that later, because you were born. I'm assuming that you were born in Utah.
No, I was born in Oregon, and I grew up in Boulder City, Nevada.
Oh wow! So,
yeah, interesting thing about that is I never lived in Utah even until I went to BYU. And so I lived there for 3 years, but I did spend occasional summers. My uncle was a paleobotanist at BYU, and we went out on fossil hunting digs and stuff for his science papers and such, and with his grad students. But that was really that was my only long-term experience in Utah, although I would always drive through the state because I used to work on ranches and farms up in western Wyoming and eastern Idaho. And of course, you got to go through Utah to get there if you most directly. And the ironic thing was Cedar City then was kind of a halfway point. We stopped there and fill up with gas and get a hamburger and head on again. And now here I live here, But yeah, so Utah is now my adopted home port. So
it is such a beautiful place. I love, with so many wide open spaces, and southern Utah that is the most unique scenery I've ever seen.
Absolutely. I just love being here. Absolutely love it.
It's wonderful. And I have to say that I really appreciated your comment about people not wearing masks.
Oh, yes. When did I make that?
It was on Jeffrey Mishlove. It was on one of his interviews, and you were talking about how, you're excited to get back to work and interact with people and train people in remote viewing. And you had mentioned a frustration that I have as well, especially being a small business owner, is the lack of people really cluing in on wearing masks in Utah.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's caused by a misunderstanding, and I sort of understand where they're coming from. They say I'm not going to wear a mask. They have this idea that the mask is intended to protect them, and so it's kind of like motorcycle helmet laws, right? They say, well, and in Utah, we don't have motorcycle helmet laws because the idea is the government is being patronistic, is trying to make you take care of yourself. So instead of it being your individual responsibility, the government is trying to impose self-protection on you. And so there does seem to be a kind of a rights analysis available there to say, wait a minute, I should be responsible for myself and take the consequences if I do something stupid, and I agree with that, right? What people don't understand, though, is that's not what masks are about. The idea of masks isn't to protect you. You might get some incidental protection from it, but it's to protect other people from you. And from a constitutional perspective, that's what rights are all about. The government, there's lots of arguments about this, but the government doesn't have the right to protect you from yourself, but it does have the right to protect you from other people. Your rights end at my nose, right? And that's what masks are about, protect other people. And so there is no constitutional defense for not wearing a mask if it's deemed by the best authority that it's going to be helpful. And you as a business owner realize you're being harmed by people not wearing their masks. And not even to mention people who actually get ill because people not wearing their masks infect them. So it's a misunderstanding. This is not a rights thing. This is a protecting others principle that's involved in this.
I love that. Thank you for saying that, because it's been interesting for me to see how many people in the quote unquote UFO community have kind of gone into that anti-masking. They've fallen into believing a lot of the misinformation, disinformation that is being shared right now, which is it's most unfortunate, especially when it comes to other people's lives and livelihoods.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So thank you for that. That's brilliant. Thank you. So there's so many things, you have so many areas of interest. I would love to pick your brain and have you back on the show, because I want to hear about Switzerland. I want to hear about, that just sounds like such a remarkable place to go on a mission. I bet it was absolutely beautiful.
And the irony here is, of course, folks who are in the LDS culture, the Mormon culture, know that in principle, you don't put down where you want to go. The church decides where you go, right? And so on the form to sign up, there's a place that says, where would you like to go? And I figured, that's a trick. If you put down where you want to go, they'll make absolutely sure you don't go there, right? And so I just left that block blank. But if someone had asked me and said, where would you want to go most on your mission? I would have said Switzerland. Absolutely would have said Switzerland. And so when I got my mission call in the mail and I open it up and it says, you have been called to, and I paused and looked at it and said, what? The Swiss Zurich mission? What the heck? I actually do get to go where I wanted to go.
Wow.
And of course, Switzerland was awesome. I mean, if I couldn't live in the United States permanently, Switzerland would be my first choice after that. It's just a wonderful country.
What was your favorite thing about it?
About Switzerland?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I had several. First of all, I like the mountains. Lots of my friends are beach people. To me, it's the mountains because I grew up in them, basically, in the mountains. I love the mountains, and the Swiss mountains are just wonderful. I love the green countryside. I love the independent attitude of the Swiss. In fact, I mentioned I'm a gun guy. I like guns. We'd go to teach a lesson or something in somebody's house, and they'd take our overcoats and hang them in the closet. But first, they'd have to move their assault rifle out of the way to hang our coats up, right? Because everybody in Switzerland has a gun. And I say everybody. If you're a conscientious objector, they give you a first aid kit instead. But anyone who isn't, at least for, pretty much for their whole lives, they have guns in their closets or wherever, right? And so I enjoyed that. Although it was kind of ironic, my first day in Switzerland, we're in our apartment getting my stuff settled in, and I look out the window, and there's this guy going by on a moped, and he's got an assault rifle slung over his shoulder. And I asked my companion, well, is that a terrorist? Should we report that? Oh, no, that's just a guy going off to do his mandatory range time. The Swiss, if they're during the ages of roughly 18 to 60, I think, are required to fire a certain number of rounds out on the range every month or every 6 months, whatever it is. I don't remember anymore. So that's just a normal sight. You saw people walking around with them all the time, and of course they didn't have any trouble with them. Their murder rate was hugely small back then, and it's still small today. It isn't about the guns. It's about the people who have the guns is the problem. So anyway.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. That must have been fascinating. I remember I've got a moped story. I went to, with the university choir, I went over to Thailand, and we were, in Bangkok the first couple of days, and it was just very interesting to see how many people could actually fit on a moped. I've never in my life would have imagined that a family of 8 could just hang out on a moped. And I'm like, okay,
it's like Volkswagen stuffing, isn't it?
I know. It was a sight. That is for sure. That was an amazing place. It certainly taught me a lot. And I'm definitely, I love, I'm so grateful to be, I'm so grateful to live in Utah and be, in the United States of America, which is such a beautiful country, and we have so many advantages and things. And so you got out of, after you got done with your mission, and you just said that you decided to join the military. How did your military career unfold?
So that's one of those watershed moments in a person's life that changes their whole future. For me, that was the case. I came home. I married the girl who'd waited for me while I was on my mission. We were destitute at BYU trying to go to school, and I wanted to continue in Middle Eastern studies, but they didn't offer Arabic at BYU at the time. Now they're a big language school for Middle Eastern languages. Back then they didn't offer Arabic, and my then wife had tried to join the army to become a Russian linguist before I met her, and they turned her down because she had some congenital back problems. So she says to me, well, we don't have any money and you want to learn Arabic. Well, you could just join the army and they'll teach you Arabic and pay you to do it. And I'm thinking, by this time, I still, I'd grown up fascinated by the military. At this point, I didn't want anybody telling me what to do. I don't know why I got married, if that was my condition. But nonetheless, I said, I don't know. I don't want to go in the military. People tell me what to do. And she kind of pouted about it. And so finally I said, all right, I'll go down and I'll at least investigate it. So I went down to the recruiter, and of course, pretty much that was the end of it. Right? The recruiter sold me a bill of goods, which turned out mostly to be true. And I ended up joining the Army. And of course, that completely changed. Honestly, changed because I didn't know where I was going with my life. But that actually put me in a direction that just had profound consequences. I did become an Arabic linguist, and then I went to officer candidate school. And then because of that, I ultimately ended up at Fort Meade and in a position to be recruited to become a remote viewer for the military, a psychic spy for the military. And I had no idea that even existed. In fact, almost nobody knew that existed. But if I had not taken that first step, and that's one thing, she is my former wife now, but I bless her for that by kind of, in a way, I don't say manipulate, strong-arming me into getting into the Army. That was one of the most important things that ever happened to me, and I owe that to her. So
were you originally here in Utah then when you were recruited?
Actually, I was at BYU, and I enlisted from Utah, and so although I changed that back to Nevada because that was really my home port, because Nevada didn't have a state tax and Utah did, and so they were taking Utah tax out of my paycheck. And I said, I don't know anything to Utah. So I changed it back to Nevada. But yes, I was in Utah when I enlisted. So
wow. And so when you in your military career, where are the places that you traveled? What types of things did you do before the remote viewing?
So a lot of course, for a linguist gets a lot of training. So I did my basic in Missouri and then was out at Monterey, California for a year. I mean, that was about as close to not being in the military as you can get and still be in the military. What a great experience that was. So I'm in Monterey learning Arabic, and then I went out to Massachusetts for some training, and then I went to Goodfellow, Texas for some training where my daughter was born, and then I went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where I went to OCS. You see, this is a travelogue, right? And OCS was at Fort Benning, so by then I'd covered pretty much a big chunk in the United States. And then my first assignment was to Germany with the Special Forces folks over there in southern Germany, which was a great experience. I wasn't Special Forces qualified. I was their intelligence officer, and I'd say got to jump out of perfectly good airplanes, although for me that was 45 or 50 nightmare experiences in a row.
Wow.
No, it wasn't that horrible. It was just a parachute landing. It was horrible. But anyway, and I came back, went to Fort Meade. Well, I went to another Army school in Arizona, but went to Fort Meade, and that's where it all happened. I was working as a Middle East analyst in a human intelligence organization at Fort Meade when I got recruited to become a remote viewer.
And so who found you, and how did that whole thing happen, and why were they so interested in bringing you into the program?
Again, this is that synchronicity thing happening, right? This is just kind of, you'd almost call it a miracle, except that then the other question is, well, why me, right? So I had been assigned quarters right next to Skip Atwater. So that's how most people know him today. But Fred Holmes Atwater, captain, who was the founder of the Army's remote viewing program, and at that time the operations and training officer. And I was across the street from Tom McNair, who was one of the people being trained as a remote viewer. But of course, I didn't know that. This was a very tightly held secret. It's what's called a SAP, a Special Access Program. And the biggest reason why it was so tightly held, there are other reasons, but the biggest one is because there's no defense against remote viewing. The only thing you can do to guarantee they're not going to remote view you is to take out the remote viewer. And so the highest level of classification in this SAP was the identities of the people, the personnel. And so I couldn't know, they couldn't tell me what they were doing. They couldn't tell me anything about it. All I knew was it was weird because they both wore civilian clothes on a military installation. That's all they wore. And Tom had a full beard, which is also very weird on a military installation, right? And I had no idea what they did. I tried fishing around. I won't go into details about that. I do talk about it in my book, Reading the Enemy's Mind. It gives all those details. But one day they knocked on my door and they said, "We think you might be good at what we do." I said, "What do you do?" And they said, "We can't tell you." And then my question is, well, how do you know then if I'd be good at it? But they said, "We're going to give you some tests if you're willing. And if you score where we think you will, then we'll read you on to the program. And then you can decide at that point whether you want to do it or not." Okay. So it turns out that, some people might think that all that time in art had been wasted. Turns out that was the thing that pushed them over, because they were looking for Army officers that were competent in their career, that had punched all their tickets and they were where they were supposed to be and successful, but with added things that you don't normally find in an Army officer. For example, studio art, involvement in studio art, like painting or drawing or whatever. And they'd seen some of my work on the walls and my artwork on the walls of my apartment. Or into music, and I've been playing guitar then for about 20 years, I guess. Or involvement in foreign languages, and by then I was fluent in German and was competent in Arabic and Hebrew. And other creative pursuits, I also like to write short stories and stuff and have them sent off and rejected by publishers. so it was like, look at this guy. We can't not try him out. You know, he's got all the stuff we were looking for. They couldn't guarantee I'd be good, obviously, just based on that. But the odds were higher that I might be successful because of that background. So
that is fascinating.
Yeah. So they recruited me, and then I became a psychic spy. So.
And so, I mean, as you started to learn about what you were getting involved with, what were your thoughts, and did that conflict with your religious beliefs?
So I'll start with the religious thing first. The interesting thing about this is that I did not find that it conflicted with Mormonism at all. In fact, if anything, Mormonism is probably one religion where it's probably the least conflict with this stuff. And of course, you know, I don't know if you're LDS or if you know how much you know about the doctrine, but the idea is that Mormons believe very strongly in personal revelation, that we don't need it. We have our own direct conduit to God in things that concern our lives and so on. And we're always talking about inspiration and spiritual experiences and stuff. And so that was helpful. But there's also this idea in the pre-existence that Mormons, unlike most other Christian denominations, don't believe that we just came into existence in this life, that the basic identities, our basic identities have existed forever, and we were able to act as sentient beings in a pre-earth existence, spirit world we call it. And in that spirit world, we had certain abilities like knowing things and communicating and moving without having physical bodies. Well, if you start thinking about that, that sounds an awful lot like ESP, right? At least some of it does. And so, because we believe we had those spiritual abilities before, and we come into this life and our memories are wiped for various reasons, doesn't mean we lost the abilities, just means we forgot them. And so my view, very quickly summarized, my view is that when you learn to remote view or to be psychic in general terms, all you're doing is starting to remember these abilities that you once had in this pre-earthly life. And so it fits in, it makes sense in a Mormon context. Now, you know, I don't usually talk about the religious side of this in settings, but this being Utah-based program, I figure, you know, it probably makes sense to discuss it here.
Absolutely. And I think it's really fascinating. I mean, I grew up, you know, LDS and things, and it is interesting for me to talk to people about, you know, the religious aspects of things, and there is such an influence, and I'm sure, you know, with other religions there would be a stigma attached to doing something like this, so that it's really important that you explained that and gave your perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had no religious issues with it at all. And I can't say that for some of my fellows. We had a kind of a smorgasbord of religions represented in the remote viewing unit. We didn't have any Jewish folks. I'm not sure how that happened, but so generally speaking, they're not highly represented in the military anyway, so maybe that's the reason. But I don't see any reason why they wouldn't have been able to, you know, find a religious context for this as well, but who knows. But some, and I won't go into specific religion, some of the other religions, they didn't have too much trouble with it. But there are other ones which, when they were confronted with the remote viewing, the reality of the remote viewing experience, with what their religions were teaching about anything paranormal, they had a real faith crisis. And for the most part, they left their faith traditions behind as they became remote viewers. I didn't find a need for that, nor did some of my fellows. It seemed to be, you know, it seemed to work out just right, it fit right in. Which, that reminds me, though, of something most people don't know. So there's Ingo Swann, who's the one who created remote viewing in the first place and was a major theorist in all of it. And Ingo actually lived in Tooele, Utah, for his teenage years, so he had a Utah history.
I did not know that.
He did, and before he joined the Army and went off to Korea, he worked as a young adult at the arms depot that was in Tooele. So he had a LDS, or not an LDS. He wasn't a Mormon, but he certainly had a Utah experience, and of course somewhat understood Mormonism as well. Even more interesting that one of the legendary early remote viewers is a guy named Pat Price. And Pat Price, although at the time he was a remote viewer, he had become a Scientologist, but he started off life. He was born and grew up in Salt Lake City and actually was in a Mormon family. He was a member of a Mormon family. And so there's this weird kind of Utah Mormon connection, even at the foundation of remote viewing. So, how does that crosswalk? I don't know, but it's intriguing nonetheless.
It is fascinating, and it's been interesting for me to do, all sorts of research on people and different places. And Utah is one of those places where we have so much going on that seems to just we don't know a lot about it. But when you start, for me researching this, all roads really do lead to Utah. And a lot of that has to do with the military.
We seem to have a kind of a pollinating, as Utah, it seems to have a pollinating influence on the world. Stereo, the stereo music, the old stereo idea of stereo, was invented by Harvey Fletcher, who originated in Utah. TV started with, why can't I think of his name all of a sudden? Television was invented by a former Utahn.
Right, and I should know this because my father was actually friends with. Yes.
Philo T. Farnsworth. Of course, the Marriotts, who were a huge economic force in the world, and Romney's political, and they all have Utah roots. It's kind of like we've got this leavening agent out there, the yeast that's helping the world rise. I'm not saying that every notable thing in the universe is created in Utah, but surprisingly large amount of it comes from Utah, based on how this population size and such.
Well, and it is fascinating too. We were one of the birthplaces of the internet.
Yes.
The University of Utah, and then Stanford, Research Institute, which I find fascinating too. There's that crossover there, back in the late '60s, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, and of course, maybe that's why I moved here, because it's such a fascinating place. I don't know.
Well,
beautiful.
It's home
to you, Erica, so
okay.
I couldn't stay away.
Why, thank you. No, I do. I do love it here. It's my home, and it's beautiful, and it's intriguing, very intriguing to me as of late. And we also, have a large concentration of aerospace and defense contractors here.
Yep.
So, which is very interesting. And so to get back to the early days of your experience with the remote viewing, how many people were in the program with you?
So I did a calculation on it, and it wasn't very many. Okay, so altogether from, let me get the dates right, 1977, when Skip Atwater and a guy named a major named Scotty Watt, started the program for the Army, until the program was ended as Stargate. It was by then known as Stargate in 1995. There was, near as I can calculate, a total of 45 people associated with the actual military program. Now, obviously, there's this larger group of people who were involved in the admin and the support and all that stuff. But the people involving the direct staff and the direct remote viewers, there's about 45 of them. And 25 of those were remote viewers over that roughly 18 years. So there were times when there was only one remote viewer on board, particularly in the very early 80s. There was times when I'm going to throw out a number here. I'd have to verify it. I know I once knew it for sure, but I'm 68, so my brain doesn't always functional. But I think the most number of viewers we had on board at any one time was 11. And so, of course, this is spread out over time. So I was in the program for 7 years, where most military assignments are just 3 years at the most before they send you on. I got stabilized there for 7 years. Other of the viewers were there for roughly the same amount of time or shorter or a little bit longer. And so there's a lot of overlap. So there's periods when we had, I think, at most 11 viewers on hand, or people trained to be viewers or whatever. But generally speaking, probably an average, good working average is between 4 and 6 at any one time.
And so what was a typical day like?
Well, we got up and the servants brought us our morning newspaper, and no, it wasn't like that at all. Generally speaking, I don't know if you could say a typical day, but usually we did one remote viewing session a day. And it might be an operational session, or it might be a practice session, or if we were in training, we might do more than that. But generally speaking, they just had us actually doing our direct function one session a day, which could last anywhere from half an hour up to about maybe 2 hours. Now, of course, we also were training other personnel, so we had that other assignment. Plus, we had to do all the standard military stuff. We always had to fill out forms and check the fire extinguishers and verify our security clearances and all that normal Army military-related stuff. So at any given day, we might have some military duties performed. We might have some remote viewing to do. We might be working as an analyst on a particular remote viewing project. But we had a lot of downtime. And the theory behind that was that this was a military unit that didn't have equipment, that the people involved were the equipment. And so the evidence seemed to indicate that if a viewer was relaxed and had less stress on them, that they seemed to perform better. And so we were encouraged to do some relaxing things. After we did a session, for example, we were told, Skip would tell us to go out and hug a tree, right? So what that meant was go outside, walk around, kind of commune with nature, kind of let dissipate all the stuff that was going on in the session. We oftentimes had just general activities that we did as distractions. They found that if you're doing something else rather than focusing on viewing, it tended to help when you settled in to do your viewing. So I did things like reading books on parapsychology and such. I actually was doing a part-time master's degree with the Department of Defense in strategic intelligence. So I might work on some of that stuff when I wasn't viewing. Mel Riley, who was, we all love Mel. He'd actually the only person to ever do two tours as a remote viewer. He was very much into Native American crafts and art, and he might be in the back beating a buckskin jacket or something, And so we all had these different little pastimes that were intended to take our minds off the remote viewing in a way that didn't stress us out. Now, somebody's going to say, "Well, that's a waste of taxpayer money." Why weren't they doing something constructive when they weren't remote viewing? Well, in a way, we were. We were the equipment, and if you're in a standard military unit, in an infantry unit, your main thing might be your M16 rifle. Well, about 80% of the time, that rifle sits on a shelf. There are only about 20% of the time that you actually have it out at the range shooting or doing training or whatever. So in a way, that's what we were doing. We were functional during the time we were supposed to be functional, but in our downtime, it was a way of keeping us maintained. And so that I hope kind of gives you an idea that, in a way that answers your question.
I think it's fascinating, and you're so descriptive with that, and I can just picture all of you and the daily things involved in that, and that is right. Since you are the instrument, you do have to have time to decompress and take care of yourself, and that's really interesting. And so, describe when you were first learning about remote viewing. I mean, did you have any moments where you just thought, okay, this is just absolute nonsense?
No, I never had that problem. My problem was, can I do this? Will I actually be able to do this? And even once I'd done it and been successful at it, will I still be able to do it, right? And I even have that today when I sit down to do a session. Like I actually have an operational project, a real world project that I need to work on sometime between now and next week. Even now, after I've done thousands of these sessions and seen it work, I've also seen it not work. And so any session I sit down to, I think, am I actually going to be able to do this? Gee, I don't know. So there's always a little bit of a worry or an uncertainty or whatever. It isn't that the worry isn't that it's that remote viewing doesn't work, because I'm way beyond that now. I've seen too much stuff actually successful in remote viewing and had successes of my own too much to doubt the reality of remote viewing. What I doubt is, from time to time, my ability in a given setting to be able to do it. And so I always have to struggle with that. And I think most people who get involved in remote viewing probably share that.
And I'm sure that they do. It is so interesting. What were some of the first, when you were, first training and learning about this, what were some of the first things that you learned?
Let me answer this in a little bit different way, and then you'll see, you'll get why here in a second. So when people ask me, when I teach people to remote view, which of course is my commercial enterprise teaching people this, when I teach people to remote view, what do you teach them? They say. And I say, well, I could give you an answer that would take hours because there's a lot of detail to it. But let me explain the two main principles. And those are, the first principle is I teach people how to recognize the actual remote viewing signal. And the problem is it's a very subtle thing. The signal is very subtle, and it's easy not to recognize it, which is why everybody doesn't do this, because they may be receiving a signal, might not even notice, right? So the first thing I teach them is how to recognize this very subtle, nuanced kind of a signal. The second thing I teach them is how to recognize mental noise. Okay, so the mental noise is all that racket that's always going in all over heads all the time. Speculations, guesses, thinking you know what things are, all of that kind of stuff. It's just this mental racket that's going on, which is much louder than that signal. So I teach them how to recognize the signal. I teach them how to recognize the mental noise. And then I guess there's this kind of tertiary thing that they learn, how to differentiate the noise from the signal and what to do about it. Okay, so that is easily and simply expressed and makes a lot of sense. But of course, it's always a lot harder to do it in practice than it is just to state the principles. So what I was first learning as a remote viewer were those two principles: how to recognize the signal and how to recognize and what to do about the noise. And that's where all the struggles are. And that's why sometimes you do really, really well in a remote viewing setting, and sometimes you do really, really badly, is because the strength of the signal varies and the amount of noise varies, and you can often be fooled by the noise. And so you have to learn how not to be fooled. And so those were the kinds of things I was learning.
It's just, the whole thing is fascinating to me. And can you, because we have you new people that are listening to the show, and they might not really understand what remote viewing is or the history of the subject. Can you give us a little information, a little background on how remote viewing came into to be and the history of the subject?
So first, let's talk about what it is, okay? Because you can kind of talk about that independent of the history. So remote viewing is essentially an ability through, it's a kind of applied consciousness ability that allows a remote viewer to perceive, experience, and describe persons, places, or things that are remote in some sense of the word. So, for example, on the other side of the planet, or locked inside a sealed room, or sealed inside an envelope, an opaque envelope, or distant in time, past or future. Okay. So essentially you're able to, it's a form of extrasensory perception. You're able to perceive and experience these things independent of your senses. And yet it is still a perceptual experience. It's almost as if this signal, whatever it is, bypasses your senses and brings information direct into the perceptual centers of your mind and brain. It's a skill. Everybody has the capability. I mean, there may be a few outliers that just won't be able to in some way or another, but generally speaking, it's an ability that's commonly distributed throughout the human race. And it just depends on you realizing, hey, maybe I can do this, and then trying it, applying the right principles to do. And I've taught plenty of people how to do it. So that's what remote viewing is in a very nutshell kind of a way. Okay, now what was the other half of that question?
So the history.
Oh, the history, yes. It was actually developed. Now, first of all, people say, oh, people have been remote viewing for thousands of years. Well, that's sort of true. The ability that allows remote viewing to work is something that people have practiced for millennia, really, because it is an innate human ability. But it's been practiced in a lot of ways that are some better than others and some worse than others. Remote viewing is actually historically probably the most rigorous and formatted approach to this that we've encountered. The whole point of it was to do away with all the fluff that gets associated with a lot of the psychic behavior that people try and manifest, and just cut to the core aspect of what it means to be psychic, what it means to exercise extrasensory perception, and how best to refine it to the point of it being most successful. And it grew up in the lab. The gentleman I've talked about, Ingo Swann, came up with the idea back in the late 60s, very early 70s. And through an interesting set of, I almost want to say coincidences, but he came into contact with a physicist at Stanford Research Institute, which is now SRI International, named Hal Puthoff, or Harold E. Puthoff. And the two of them did an experiment that was successful involving this remote viewing modality. And the CIA got wind of it. And the CIA was trying to figure out why the Russians, or the Soviets, were spending hundreds of millions of dollars in this kind of stuff. And they said, well, these guys just did that experiment over at SRI. Maybe they can help us answer that question. So the CIA contracted with SRI, and Puthoff was the director of that program, and they developed remote viewing in the form it is today over about, the program lasted from 1972, 73 until 1995. So about a quarter of a century, right? And during that time, the Air Force was involved, the Army was involved, they did a little bit with the Navy. The remote viewing program came under the administration of the Defense Intelligence Agency. The only organization that never actually owned remote viewing was the CIA. And ironically, it's come to be known as the CIA remote viewing program. And the CIA never ran it. They tossed the money into it at first, and then just essentially stopped their interest in it. And then in 1995, Congress required that the CIA accept the program, and the CIA didn't want it. And so they came up with this cooked report that justified them canceling the program. So the CIA never actually ran the Stargate remote viewing program.
How fascinating. And I had read somewhere, and I wanted to get your opinion on this, that Sidney Gottlieb initially funded Puthoff's work.
Yes. So, yes, more or less. So Gottlieb, of course, is famous for the mind control MK Ultra stuff. And people see him as an evil villain in the universe. I think that's a little strong. I mean, he obviously did some wrong things and maybe some bad things, but he wasn't all bad. Some of the stuff he did was actually beneficial. I mean, his goal was to support national security, and he did that to a great extent, despite the complications, shall we say, that arose with MK Ultra and everything. But he found the remote viewing stuff interesting as well, and so he funded it. The first funding part of it he did. He very quickly lost his job after that, not because of remote viewing, but because of the other stuff he'd been involved in. And yet, for at least a little while after that, the CIA continued to fund the program. But then, so what happened was they were funding it, and then, of course, all the MK Ultra stuff came out, and the Church Committee, which investigated and essentially they called the CIA the rogue elephant of the intelligence community. You know, that was Frank Church, a senator from Idaho, actually. There's another Mormon connection. Can you believe it?
No.
Well, anyway, So the CIA's I guess it must have been the president at the time, appointed a new CIA director with the instructions of clean the place up. And he came in and said, essentially, if there's anything that's illegal, immoral, or controversial, get rid of it. Okay. So remote viewing is neither illegal nor immoral, but it certainly is controversial. And so the CIA just essentially blanket cut all of these programs. And since it had some connection to Gottlieb, they especially wanted to get rid of it. And so at that point, Dale Graff, who was an Air Force analyst, civilian intelligence analyst, had become interested in this, and he persuaded the Air Force to pick up funding for the program, and that lasted for 4 years. And then the Army moved in and actually kind of overlapped and set up their own program. And then after a while, the Army the Army offered the program up to the Defense Intelligence Agency and so on. That kind of puts us on the same, on that track that I already mentioned. So, yes, you ask a simple question, and I give you like 10-paragraph answer.
No, I really appreciate that, because it is interesting to see some of these connections, and I know specifically with Gottlieb and his connections to MK Ultra, there have been some questions about that, and so that's good to clarify that, and so thank you very much for doing that. I appreciate it.
No problem.
And so let me ask you, and then we're going to take a break, and this is a loaded question, but when you have people, like Skip Atwater, who was a proponent of non-lethal weapons, and then the military applications of the paranormal, and you have different, figures that you see that have been involved in all of this, and then the UFO subject and their connections to non-lethal weapons and different things, would there be, what are your thoughts on that?
On non-lethal weapons?
Mm-hmm. And how the UFO subject or remote viewing seems to attract people that are, that's their area of expertise.
Gotcha. So first off, actually, you've got your personalities kind of jumbled here. Skip Atwater wasn't particularly interested in non-lethal weapons. It was actually John Alexander, and John, in fact, ran the non-lethal weapons program at Los Alamos for a number of years. He was very much into non-lethal weapons and still is interested in the field. Skip, however, had a specialized interest in UFOs. Okay, he was particularly interested in not that he was like a UFO buff like a lot of these folks are. It was that he found it interesting and had some ins into information about it and wanted to investigate it using remote viewing as a tool. So in terms of non-lethal weapons, I don't know that there's any particular overlap between remote viewing and that. But what's more interesting, particularly concerning the theme of your podcast, is the crosswalk between remote viewing and the UFO UAP phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. All of this is fascinating, and I can't. It's just. The more I learn, the more my mind is blown, and it really does kind of it narrows down to specific groups of people who have been involved in the subject. Putoff and Dr. Kit Green and John Alexander and some of these figures that have always, they've been there for decades.
Well, after the break, maybe we could look into that. And
that would be awesome. That would be really, really cool. And thank you so much for being here. I'm Erica Lukes here with Paul Smith. You can check out his really incredible book. I just picked it up again. I had read it before a couple years ago, The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing, the Secret Military Remote Perception Skill Anyone Can Learn. It is a phenomenal book. And so, and Paul, tell us where you can get that. It's available on Amazon?
Yes, it's available on Amazon, and that's a great place to get it. You'll actually get it sooner if you order it there. But you can get a signed copy from me if you want to go to the website Guide to Remote Viewing, all run together. It's all one word, so to speak, guidetoremoteviewing.com. And postage is free, but it is media mail, so it'll take a while.
Wonderful. Oh, that's great. And I can't wait to get back from the break and then talk to you. I want to, before we go to break, just thank all of my listeners and show supporters from all over the world. You are a really wonderful, thoughtful, intelligent group of people, and we are all searching for answers. And I love that every Friday night you are here with me, getting in chat and asking great questions. I appreciate your support. You can go to UFOclassified.com to help support the show, and we will take a 5-minute break and be right back.
Okay.
Welcome back to the second half of UFO Classified. I apologize again for the technical difficulties. I'm telling you, one of these days I will get a producer, but then again, it kind of makes life exciting living on the edge. I am joined again with Paul Smith, who I did a pre-recorded show earlier today, and I want to just give you a little bit of information about him. Paul Smith is was a psychic spy for the DoD Stargate program for 7 years, and is just a remarkably fascinating individual. So here we have a little bit of the second half of the interview, if all goes as planned. And I want to just also say that when we rolled in on the second portion of the interview, we were talking a little bit about his wonderful book that I'm going to get. It just sounds absolutely fascinating. The book is called Reading the Enemy's Mind. And so this will be a great book in conjunction with the other book that he wrote called, that we were talking about, that I absolutely love, The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. He wrote The Secret Military Remote Perception Skill Anyone Can Learn. So these are two great books, and we will get into this conversation with him again about this. And I just want to give all of you a little bit of a shout out here. Thank you for being show supporters. And Jasmine, I want to give you my love. Doug, I want to give you my love. And I know this is a hard time, but here is
print, although you can get used copies of it. So I am perfectly happy for people to get used copies, get it from the library, get it on Kindle, because I'm not getting any more royalties from it. So you can even steal it as far as I'm concerned, but I'm not going to advocate dishonesty, but nonetheless. Yeah, it's gotten a lot of good reviews, good press. It was actually, when it first came out, it was picked as a Reader's Digest editor's choice and book bonus. So an excerpt of it appeared in Reader's Digest, actually. So it got some real attention at the time. So, and what it is unlike the Essential Guide, the Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. The purpose of that book is it fills a niche in the literature, in the remote viewing literature, which is for just a generally good survey, explanation, discussion of what remote viewing is. Most other books out there are memoirs or their actual manuals or whatever. This book is designed to give people who are new to the field a good place to kind of get some grounded knowledge about it without. Anytime you get into remote viewing, the problem is that there's all this. It's almost like chaos out there. There's all kinds of people, all kinds of different opinions about it, and people who just newly get into the field are kind of bewildered. Well, what can I believe? Because there's contradictory things that are said about remote viewing. There's things that aren't actually about remote viewing that are said about remote viewing. They don't even know where to start. The point of this book is to give you a solid, foundational, non-sensational place to start to help you have a framework in which to understand it. There's a secondary purpose, and that is to help people. If you happen to be in remote viewing and you have relatives that are skeptical about what you're doing, right, you can hand them this book without fear of them being totally shocked by anything in there. I don't get into remote viewing UFOs. I don't get to any of that stuff. I just talk about the foundational questions that people have when they're first getting to know remote viewing. I present evidence in there why we know it's real. I get some really, really good evidence in there. And I even have a section for aimed at the skeptics, saying, here are the typical skeptical arguments. Here's why they're wrong. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get off on that soapbox, but that's the Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. The Reading the Enemy's Mind is more of I would say it's a history, but it's more than a history. It documents where the program came from and where it went. But I also talk about the theory behind it, what we know about remote viewing and that kind of thing. So both books are kind of complementary to each other in a way.
Well, like I mentioned, I love some of your quotes in the Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. I mean, it's just, they're very succinct, and you, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, you have a very logical thought process, and you're not going to, you don't go off the deep end with things, and that does make what you're saying so much more credible. And in the world of UFOs, as you know, there's so much nonsense out there. It really is. It's nice to have somebody with your credentials and your mindset, your skill set.
So maybe I should right now might be a good place to explain my attitude, I guess, maybe about UFO UAPs. So I started off pretty much as a positively inclined agnostic on the UFO thing. One thing I tend to like to shock late night radio audiences, like if I'm coast to coast or whatever, I say, I belong to the only Christian denomination that believes as the point of doctrine that there is intelligent life on other planets, right? And people don't realize that, but Mormonism really does believe that God created intelligent races that inhabit other planets throughout the universe. And so just from a pragmatic religious perspective, I don't have a trouble with believing there are aliens. Now, are they little green or gray people or reptilians or all that? You know what? I don't know. I'm inclined to think probably some of that might be exaggerated, but, we don't know until we've done a survey of all the races in the universe. We don't know. But nonetheless, I'm perfectly okay with believing that there are other intelligent species on other planets. That's not a big deal. Are they visiting us? That was what I was agnostic about. I don't know. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's, weird weather phenomena. We don't know, or people have had too much to drink or something. But that's changed. Recent experiences, recent conversations, recent evidence has now convinced me that UAPs really are most likely extraterrestrial in origin and directed by intentional intelligence. They're intentionally directed. Are there aliens on these vehicles? I don't know. They could be like our drones. They could be maybe distantly controlled. I don't know. It's possible. Either one is possible, as far as I'm concerned. But I'm absolutely convinced now that these things are real and they are almost certainly extraterrestrial in origin. Some of that I can talk about, some of it I can't talk about, but I don't have any doubts about that anymore. Not any more than I do about anything else that I have confidence in. So that's kind of my perspective.
Well, and you say that there's some things obviously you can't talk about, but what can you talk about with regard to your feelings that this is extraterrestrial?
Interestingly, ever since I got involved in remote viewing, somehow or other aliens have gotten involved. People may be familiar with Ed Dames. I met Ed Dames in 1983. He and I went down to the Monroe Institute in Virginia and did what's called a Gateway program. They had a different title for it because it was sponsored by the Army. They called it RAPT, R-A-P-T program. But it was a Gateway program. And he and I went down there. He was my roommate. We rode on the bus together because he was going to accompany us in our remote viewing training. He wasn't part of the unit, but his unit had wanted him to get trained in remote viewing, so they talked our people into allowing Ed to kind of piggyback on what we were doing. So I'm going down to Monroe, and over the years I'd gotten somewhat familiar with not hugely, but sort of familiar with the UFO literature. I remember when I was in Switzerland, I actually came across Erich von Däniken. I didn't meet him. I got one of his books in German, and I was pretty dubious about it. Not because I was dubious about UFOs. I was dubious about von Däniken's interpretation of the evidence he presented. I mean, some of that stuff in there looked obviously fake to me. But nonetheless, I had these kind of intros over the years. And then here's Dames, and we spent hours driving down to Virginia and hours driving back, and his major point of discussion was UFO incidents, UFO flaps, UFO occurrences. And He talked about the classic ones. Oh shoot, what are they? The Walton case. I forget what that's called as a label, but the Walton case in Arizona. He talked about a bunch of others, which off the top of my head I'm forgetting now. But so, and it seemed pretty credible, but I didn't know what to think about it. And then so Dames was actually my major introduction to UFOs. Over the years, I found him to be less credible as time went on. And so I started not necessarily accepting what he was saying about it. But the irony is, in the military program, so when you're a remote viewer, one of the main rules is that you as the viewer can't know what the target is that you're remote viewing. Maybe we can talk about why and how that is later. But for this story, it's just important to know the viewer has to be blind to the target. And so when Dames finally did join the unit 2 years later, maybe it was 3 years later, 2 or so, whatever. When he joined the unit a bit later, he took advantage of that at times because he'd have these ideas about UFO events and alien involvement and stuff, and he would run us on remote viewing sessions against his beliefs about a certain UFO event that may have happened. Some of them actually did happen. We got worked on some real UFO events, but then some imaginary ones as well, it turned out. So because you're blind, you don't know you're working a UFO target. You're sitting there. It could just as well be something the KGB are doing, or a new Soviet missile, or it could be hostages in the Middle East, whatever, the kind of targets we used to do. And then it turns out it was a UFO target. Okay. Afterwards, you find that out. And at the time, we found it kind of annoying because we were expecting to do real world targets. And then it turns out Dames has sprung these things on us that had nothing to do with what our real mission was. In fact, the leadership of the unit had a couple of times forbade him from doing that. But the fact was they couldn't keep track of him either because they weren't spies. They didn't have spies sitting in there in the room. It was just Dames and the viewer. So we worked a bunch of those. And most of them today that Dames worked me on, I don't really necessarily trust as having any real legitimacy. But a few of them do have some provocative things in them and were against targets that seem to have some legitimacy. So those are still interesting. And I'm kind of glad we did it because it's interesting subject matter. I still kind of look at it with a bit of, the jury's still out, grain of salt. But nonetheless, there's some potentially interesting things there. But the other side of it is Skip Atwater, who also worked us on UFO targets. And I think I started talking about this before. By the way, tell me when to pause if you need to break in.
No. I'm just fascinated. I'm hanging on every word.
So I believe it was Richard Hoagland that was big on the Face on Mars stuff. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know when he got started, but we in the unit, and I say we, I didn't know about these, but in 1983-84 timeframe, we had a whole set of the JPL photos of the interesting anomalies on Mars. And Skip used those to kind of task us to some degree on some of that material to see if he could form any conclusion from it. And he is very responsible about doing it. Very careful to preserve the blinding, very careful not to lead us, very careful not to allow any sensory leakage into the session. And so the stuff that he developed, I found a lot more legitimate than the stuff that Dames was doing. And we did some interesting stuff. So there's this one session out there that is now quite famous, is where Joe McMoneagle talked about the underground stuff on Mars and this alleged species that had died, and he got stuff from I think the testing was Mars 1 million BC or something like that. That was kind of suggested by the JPL photos, and Skip was leveraging those to task Joe McMoneagle on it. And truthfully, a very interesting session came out of that. Whether or not it actually is real, I don't know. Joe has expressed some reservations about what he got there now, but I don't know. But we also worked some other stuff. So some fairly well-attested UFO and relatively unknown UFO events. And you can see I'm still using UFO rather than UAP here. Somehow it sounds righter. But
I agree.
One was a Argentinian minesweeper that was found adrift with no crew on board, total mystery, off the coast of Argentina. Another one was Pat Price had done some work on UFO bases around the world and skipped tasks on those. And those produced some interesting material. So UFOs were kind of a theme that percolated in and out of the remote viewing unit. If you had to assign percentages, I'd say UFO sessions made up maybe 3% of all the work we did there. But still, they seem to be getting more attention than most of the other things we did these days. So anyway, I think I was answering a question, but I have no idea what it was and how far I've come towards answering.
Well, you know what? I like where you've gone, and I have to ask you, with UFOs, UAP, whatever we're calling them today. I prefer I will always say UFO. I hate to say it, but was there ever a thought that this could be other technology, earthly technology?
You mean in the remote viewing unit? No, we didn't worry about that. And of course, again, the viewers didn't worry about it at all because we were always blind, right, until afterwards. I couldn't tell you what was in Ed's head, but I think he wanted everything to be UFO or alien in some way. So I really doubt he even entertained the idea it was terrestrial technology. Skip may or may not have. Of course, the ones he tasked us on tended to be stuff that very implausible. It would be very implausible if it was Earth technology. So I don't think that was a big issue in the military program. And of course, it is a question now that comes up. Well, maybe it's just advanced technology. In fact, Mishlove asked me that on a more recent interview. I don't know if the one you watched was remote viewing and UFOs and other anomalies, I think. Was that the one?
Right. There were actually two of them. And I know that I did watch the one that you're referencing where he kind of brought up the tic-tac UFOs and wondered if that wasn't perhaps our technology.
Yeah. So the answer, and I gave him the answer, and I'll just basically repeat it, is that it's very unlikely that it is. First of all, a lot of people that I know personally, and others that I don't, but I know by reputation, are very dubious about it being earthly derived technology, because they generally know what's possible in our current technology environment, and this is not possible in that environment. Now, is there a chance that maybe a foreign country just had a breakthrough? Well, from a logical perspective, that's possible, but generally speaking, it seems unlikely, and particularly, so the way I answered Mishlove is that in the tic-tac incident, for example, it's very unlikely that would be like the Air Force testing out their technology on the Navy just to see what happens, right? To test their parameters and stuff. And there's a couple reasons for that. First one is the possibility of a friendly fire incident is too high, right? You don't want to have your star technology get shot down because there was a flaw in it you didn't recognize and the Navy took you out, right? That would be very embarrassing. The bigger problem is that by buzzing a naval task group, there's very often more unfriendly eyes watching because they're always trying to find out our limits and our abilities and such. So there's a high likelihood that the Russians or the Chinese or who knows have legs long enough to do that might be monitoring and pick up on this technology, and that reveals something to them that we may not want them to know about, a technology that we have. So when they test that technology, it's almost always done in a controlled environment, a long ways away from where anybody you don't want to see it can monitor it. Now, in terms of like flying around, like there's lots of reports of the stealth aircraft before the stealth aircraft was revealed, and oftentimes they're reported as UFO stuff. But the problem is, of course, anytime you're dealing with a plane that flies that fast and that far, you're bound to fly outside of your controlled environment. There's just no help to that. But for testing parameters, they keep it very close. Like, for example, they might have a mock-up of an Aegis anti-aircraft system out in the middle of the Nevada desert, and then where nobody can monitor what's happening out there, and then they would test their technology against that. They wouldn't just go out and find some random battle group and test it there. It's just not the way you do things because of the risks involved in trying to do it kind of out of the envelope like that. So I am really doubtful that this stuff is earthly technology, based on a number of reasons. I'm very confident. There's always this little seed of possibility that's not, but I'm very confident that this is extraterrestrial in origin.
And that's, it is interesting because there's so many different thoughts on what the tic-tac video was. And, I know that some of the people, and I've even put this forward too, because I would think that perhaps it was maybe our technology and somehow the video got leaked and then they needed to come up with a great cover story, which the UFO topic, as a whole over the decades since the late 40s has been used as a cover for other projects that had absolutely nothing to do with UFOs.
True. That's true. They established plausible denial by adding in this kind of giggle factor thing, right? But I can tell you right now that one theory, video was leaked and it was original technology, or however you said that. I forget exactly how you said it. That I know is not true. This was a video. It's just not just video. In fact, let me put in a plug for IRVA here for a second. So the International Remote Viewing Association, we had a conference back in 2018 jointly with the Society for Scientific Exploration, had it in Vegas. And if you go up on the International Remote Viewing Association website, which is irva.org, and you go to their conference talks, 2018, Hal Puthoff gave a talk on this, and you can either become a member of IRVA and get it for free, or you can actually buy or rent it off Amazon. I forget how it works, but there's a link there. Hal Puthoff's talk was revelatory. It was really revelatory. He essentially talked about that incident, and it's not just a video. So, and I emphasize this with Mishlove as well, they had multispectral systems on that. So in other words, we're talking about radar, we're talking about millimeter wave, we're talking about FLIR, forward-looking infrared, we're talking about, I think there was some laser range finding involved. We're talking about gun camera video, we're talking about eyewitness observations, and there's a couple of other platforms in there that I don't remember, and some I may not even be able to talk about. So this is not just one thing. It's not just visual evidence. This was not just radar evidence. There were 5, 6, 7 different channels of information that were each different than the others, and they all reported the same thing. So we have a correlation of all this data, and that is really, really strong evidence for the reality of this. Really strong evidence. We're talking about the most sophisticated air defense system in the world, and it had this multispectral imagery platform, not just imagery, but sensor platform. And all of those same things reported this incident, and they all correlated. That you don't get much better evidence than that in the physical world.
And so I have to ask you, because obviously, the thought here that Puthoff and others share is that this is extraterrestrial and that it could be potentially a threat to humanity. So how do we, since this would be, of interest to everyone all over the world, have we reached out to other countries to work in unison to try to address this issue?
Well, I'll back into that question too. Let me start off with, you have lots of people who just automatically assume that aliens are benevolent. Their logic goes like this. Well, extraterrestrial civilization, extraterrestrial technology is so obviously thousands of years ahead of ours. We really don't know how far ahead it is. It could be hundreds of years, but maybe it's thousands of years. So if they draw the assumption that their technology is that more advanced, that must mean that their morals and ethics are that much more advanced, and that they're all altruistic and they're all friendly and all that stuff. And there's absolutely no reason to believe that. I think of that scene in Independence Day where the young woman is up there with a sign that says "Welcome" just before the alien blasts the building with the alien ship blasts the building with a ray. Right? They could their whole mental mindset, it could well be completely different than ours. There's this mistake that is made by inexperienced intelligence officers called mirror imaging. It's made all the time by the Civilian Command Authority. Mirror imaging assumes that the other side thinks just like you do. And even in human relations, we know that's not true. And if you start thinking that they think like you, that's when we have massive intelligence failures and wars are lost because of that. So that could apply to aliens as well. So I asked Putoff about this one time. I said, okay, Hal, from the evidence you've seen, and he hasn't shared it all with me because a lot of it is classified. From the evidence you've seen, are these aliens more like ET, or are they more like Independence Day? And he said, well, seeing some of the stuff that's happened, I have to say they're more like Independence Day. Okay. That was sobering, because here's somebody who knows probably as much or more about UFOs as anybody in the world, and he makes that assessment. Here's my belief about it, though. I think that aliens are a lot like humans in this respect, that there's a lot of different kinds. That you get some who maybe have to speak in Star Trek terms, a Klingon mentality about things. You have others that may have a Bajoran attitude about it. I'm trying to think of all the races that are on Star Trek. Some that might be more like Vulcans or whatever, And so you have different degrees of altruism. You have different degrees of aggression. You have different degrees and different agendas out there. And you probably even have aliens that are so far beyond us that they don't even recognize us. They may see us as ants or cockroaches or something, and don't even think about us in terms of being conscious entities that have agendas and cultures of our own. That's quite possible. Now, are all aliens evil and trying to take over the universe? Probably not. I sincerely doubt that's the case. Are there aliens that are what we define as evil, although they themselves might not see themselves that way? I think there probably are. I think that just like in any other interaction with intelligent beings, we need to protect ourselves, but be open to cross-pollination if we find aliens that are friendly. But you can't trust them all to be friendly. I mean, that's what happened in Latin America when the conquistadors showed up. The natives at first thought they were friends, found out the hard way they weren't. So I think we need to be careful. Trust but verify, as Reagan said.
Right.
And so, anyway, another soapbox. I apologize.
No, that's interesting, because for me, the threat narrative might seem a way that specific people could garner funding. If you use it as a threat, then that's when the money rolls in.
Yeah, well, fear sells better than positive things. The human nervous system is rigged so that the majority of our input, discrimination, whatever you want to call it, majority of our wiring is aimed at avoiding threats, and the minority of our wiring is aimed at recognizing opportunity, and which makes sense in an evolutionary perspective. The person who is so fixed on the ripe apples on the tree that they don't see the leopard sneaking up behind them is in serious trouble, right? They're out of the gene pool pretty quick. And so threat sells. I mean, that's one of the things that some of my less scrupulous comrades out there, they leverage, is this threat thing. The world's coming to an end. There's going to be this, that, the other thing. You got to buy my product now or you're going to die, whatever, right? So threat, fear sells. Right. But on the other hand, to be fair to the defense establishment and the intelligence establishment, their job is to keep us safe.
Right.
And they don't have to keep us safe from beneficial trade deals. They don't have to keep us safe from cross-cultural exchange programs. Those aren't risks. What their job is to keep us safe from the things that we don't anticipate, the things that could threaten us, either partial or even existentially. And so it makes sense that they would use this idea of fear, because that's their job. And it's a very reasonable job, and I'm glad they're doing it, because all we need is to look at the universe with rose-colored glasses, and one of these races turns out to have our demise in mind, and we're toast. We could misjudge somebody who, an alien race that has beneficial intentions and work that out. But we can't work out a deal if we judge them as being beneficial when they intend to do us in and take over the planet, in an extreme case. There's no recourse there. You can always solve the problem if they're good guys. You can't solve the problem if they're bad guys, and you misjudge that.
And that, again, thank you. That's a great explanation. So would we, or have we reached out to other governments?
Well, so that would be something that I wouldn't know, right? I'll tell you my suspicion, though. I suspect that we haven't. Or if we have, it's only been at a mid-level management level, and then only tentatively, because there's a certain image cost in taking this stuff seriously, unfortunately, because of the way our media and our science community is wired right now. They tend to make fun of people who even pretend to take this stuff seriously. They kind of use disdain and mockery and that kind of thing. Totally ignorantly. They're totally ignorant about this. But they do it. You've seen it happen. The press makes fun of this stuff, and of course the mainstream science, you've got this whole huge skeptical community that tries to downplay anything that's out of the ordinary and try and undermine it. And of course, in their justification, there is a lot of baloney out there, and there is a lot of just total foolishness out there in the UFO world, in the psychic world, and all that stuff. But the problem is that they throw the baby out with the bath. They assume that just because some of it is bogus, that it all is bogus, despite evidence that it's not. And those people are just as narrow-minded as the people who are wholeheartedly believe in everything, right? So anyway, sorry, another soapbox. You got me on circle today.
Well, lucky me.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, if there is, we are experiencing and seeing and picking up on radar and tracking unidentified objects, and we potentially think that they are from an extraterrestrial civilization. Why in the world are we sending up, thinking about, going to Mars, taking tourists up on, trips and floating space hotels and different things like that, if we haven't really determined whether there is a true threat or not?
Well, it's because just about everything else in our culture, there are people who do one thing and people who do another thing, and since we aren't a central controlled economy, not a central controlled culture or government, without any legislation against something, people are going to try and explore the boundaries. But it also kind of makes sense. Oftentimes, the people who are concerned about the UFO thing aren't the same people that are doing the space exploration thing. In fact, oftentimes, the people in the space exploration thing want to distance themselves from the UFO business because, again, they don't want to get dabbed with that paintbrush of being a lunatic, right? Which is what, of course, media and the mainstream try and do. So they have to present themselves as very solid, down to earth, don't entertain any of that kind of nonsense stuff to get their funding. Right? So that's part of it. Part of it, again, is, of course, a lot of them don't believe in that stuff. They are very disdainful of it. Then there's the other side, which do sometimes participate in this. I'm thinking now of, I'll think of his name in a minute. Anyway, I can't believe I can't remember his name. It's one of those brain cramps that come when you're not quite an octogenarian, but kind of act like you are. Right there in Vegas. Not
Bigelow.
Bob Bigelow, yeah. So he is actually quite I won't say he's a believer, but he's open-minded to the idea of extraterrestrial intelligence and UFOs and all that stuff. Very much interested in pursuing that. But he's also very much into the space tourism thing. So I think there's a little bit of a different kind of motivation in his case. I'm speculating here. I haven't talked to him about this subject. But the idea is that how are we going to find out if this stuff is real if we don't actually go look, right? And so by moving out into space, we don't know if they're going to be friendly or not, but we better darn well find out. And they've got the high ground right now. Let's go out and see what we can find out now as a way of preparing for them to either be good or bad in terms of what our situation is. It's the only way is you got to push out that knowledge frontier and first of all, develop the ability to survive in space, and then also develop the ability to acquire information that we can't get from the planet. So I think you've got a lot of different motivations, but all of them point towards space exploration.
Okay, and thank you. That is interesting. And with Bigelow, because he's such a enigmatic figure, and with his his role in at Skinwalker Ranch, and that place is obviously portrayed as there's a threat, there are portals opening up and different things, and in that regard, I think the more I research the ranch and different weapons that we could be developing, I have the more my lines are blurred, and I'm no longer necessarily thinking that what they were doing at the ranch is, looking for extraterrestrials, because they didn't have equipment, there wasn't a really solid infrastructure for collecting data and things. It's all fascinating, but what are your thoughts on this? And I know that you have so much knowledge, but could we be developing specific non-lethal weapons that mimic paranormal events? Because
so are we talking about Skinwalker Ranch, or what?
Yeah, let's talk about Skinwalker Ranch, and then also talk about the facts.
I can't say much about that, except I've heard, I've interacted with John Alexander and Putoff and Jacques Vallée and Eric Davis and a lot of folks who've had an association with the ranch, right? And then of course there's Colm Kelleher's book,
Hunt for the Skinwalker.
Yeah, Hunt for the Skinwalker, which also somewhat details this. And yeah, it's clear that there's two things that are clear, that they did attempt to do surveillance and stuff. How rigorously, it's hard to say. The other thing is that they weren't necessarily dialing it in on UFOs and on aliens. They allowed, particularly in Colm's book, they talked about a number of different possible hypotheses here, including transdimensional stuff, transtemporal stuff, and UFO ET kind of things. They didn't go in a priori believing that it was one or another. They went in with all their possibilities open, which is how you have to do it, right? And based on what I've heard from them, I don't think they drew a conclusion as to whether it was UAPs, aliens, or whatever, or whether it was something else. It seems that they had some anomalous experiences. They had some anomalous data. They had some weird things happen, and some of which could be fairly well documented, some of which couldn't at all. It was mostly witness testimony, which, even though that is evidence, notoriously witnesses oftentimes distort one thing and don't even observe some other parts of it. Not that they're trying to be deceptive, but just the human perception system, particularly in extraordinary circumstances, can get things wrong, right? So in terms of that, I don't think they ever have, well, obviously they haven't come to a conclusion, but I also don't think, that they had some assumption about what these phenomena what might be at the root of these phenomena. And indeed, some of them don't sound like alien or UAP kinds of things. They do sound like something else altogether. So as far as the new work going on there, I can't tell you about that. And in fact, I haven't even watched the series. I don't know. Is it good?
Can I plead the fifth?
Sure. No, that's
okay. No, I watch it. No, I watch it. I think it's interesting just because I know so much about the ranch. I think if they were going to really present, and you can hear my dogs having a special moment in the background. It always makes it real. My animals.
There's an alien in your house.
It wouldn't shock me. Stranger things have happened, I'm telling you. But excuse me, there's Honey and Tinker going crazy. But if they had so much knowledge of what's taking place and all of this stuff, I would have hoped that they maybe would have presented it in the first season, which I didn't feel they necessarily did. There were lots of things that they were creating, kind of this drama around, like a helicopter flying over, observing things that was mysterious, but then they actually found out, some great researcher actually found out what the helicopter was, and I think they were surveying power lines or so.
Okay.
Something. So it's just one of those things. Yeah, we love to embellish the paranormal, and of course, when you've got a TV show and things like that, you have to do things that gets ratings.
Yes, that's true. I mean, I think of Ghost Hunters, where they spend the whole episode discovering that there was a weird noise. it's a requirement. I mean, I was on the low files. Maybe you saw the episode I was on a while back.
No, I didn't. I don't have TV anymore, and I need to get it because I would love to see that episode.
This is back in 2017. So Rob Lowe and his two sons were out investigating claims of the paranormal. And they did Bigfoot. They did undersea alien bases. They did UFOs. They did all kinds of stuff, and pretty much it was kind of like that. I mean, they allegedly the old Idaho prison in Boise is haunted, and they tried to explore that and all that stuff. And it's very entertaining. It's well worth watching, even though they really didn't find much. But so we did one episode in which I taught Rob and his boys how to remote view, and just at a very basic rudimentary level, but sufficient for the task. And then we did a remote viewing exercise with them that were very successful. They each we did the two boys individually on the same target that Rob was at, and then we did Rob on one where the two boys were, and they were very successful, both of them. And you could just see that they were so excited. In fact, I overheard Rob on a phone call to one of his Hollywood friends where he said, "I have finally found real evidence of a paranormal effect," and he was referring to remote viewing. So wow. that was quite rewarding. But it's that same kind of feel. They had to try and make a show interesting in which they weren't finding a lot, and it was definitely entertaining, worth watching in spite of the fact that they didn't find Bigfoot. Right. So
absolutely. And I love ghosts. I used to watch Ghost Hunters.
Yeah. Well, and I did want to say they did have success at remote viewing. So at least one of those episodes had a payoff. So anyway.
Sweet. Well, I'll have to watch that episode. That's really fascinating. And it is, we do have such a love of the paranormal. And like you mentioned in your book, we're drawn to these types of events or things that create, and you put it much better than I do, clearly, but just that create fear or different things. I mean, we have this reaction, and you mentioned in the book, you were talking about the was it the tiger, and you had just mentioned that too, and if you're minding the apple tree and things.
Yes, yeah.
And
it was a leopard, but the effect is the same.
Yeah. No, that's really
they
wonderful.
both have teeth.
Exactly. And I wouldn't. Yeah, absolutely. But it is true. And so I have a couple things I want to ask you, because I find this very fascinating, and I know that in this SAIC, which is a great organization, and I've got probably over a dozen of the journals here that they publish and things. And there's one particular back in '96, I believe, where Put Off was talking about remote viewing and different things, and there was a mention that he was referring to back in 72, that he was approached to open Open Earth Tech. And so I'm wondering, do you know who approached him to move to Austin after the remote viewing?
Yes, and there's nothing controversial about that. It was a guy named Bill Church.
Okay.
He was the heir to the Church's Fried Chicken franchise. And Bill was an awesome guy. I met him. He's really nice. He was a frustrated physicist. He had been going to school for physics, and then, as I recall the story, his dad passed away, and somebody had to take over the family business, so he did, and was very successful. But he couldn't pursue physics anymore, so he did the next best thing. He had really deep pockets because it was a very successful corporation, and he used that money to entice Hal away from SRI and set him up in an independent laboratory in Austin, Texas, and pursuing foundational physics research. And Bill would come in and help out to the degree he could, and come in to visit, see how things were going, keep track of it all, as his way of kind of living his dream, even though he couldn't overtly live it himself because of the requirements his family and his business needed. But yeah, Bill Church, he was a great guy, and he was very important in getting enabling Hal to actually pursue this stuff that he would not have been able to do in any other environment or setting.
Oh, that's fascinating. Thank you for clarifying. And I love Austin. I have to say, what a great place.
So as I tell people, I lived in Austin for 17 years, and I really liked the place. But having moved here to Cedar City, I would never move back to Austin. I love Cedar City too much.
Yeah, well, it's a totally different vibe.
Oh, yes, that's true.
Much more laid back in Cedar City.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so thank you for clarifying that. And then I also wanted to ask you, because there is some mention of the Science Applications International Corporation. And I've also heard that in reference to, Skinwalker Ranch, and there's a really great book called Cameleo, and Robert Guffey also mentions Science Applications International Corporation. What can you tell us about that?
So first off, Cameleo spelled Cameleo.
Yes.
Oh, I'll check into that.
You should. It could be
I can't
Jacques
tell you
Vallée
much.
references that as well.
Does he?
He does in his latest journal.
Okay, I'll have to look into it. I actually have another book that I heard on maybe it was you that suggested, I don't remember. Anyway, I can't tell you much. The only connection I know that SAIC had was when Ed May, who was Hal Puthoff's successor in running the remote viewing program, Ed May moved the remote viewing program from SRI, where it was becoming less of a popular thing, and moved it to SAIC. I don't know the exact timing. It was like the last year or two of the program's existence before the CIA shut it down. And SAIC, of course, these corporations, you kind of carve out a little spot in a little niche, and as long as you're bringing in grant dollars or federal budget dollars or whatever, and they get their share of it, you kind of act kind of like a little autonomous feudal state within the organization. At SRI, that's what the remote viewing program was. As long as they were bringing in outside dollars, then they were able to operate, and they had physical space and all that kind of stuff. In a way, it's kind of like those. Let's see, not quite, but a little bit like those antique stores, where each little antique business has a corner of the store, and they have all of their stuff set up in there, and then there's a central checkout stand where people bring their wares up and check out. But it's kind of more of a communal activity with a kind of a layer on top that manages it, right? So that's kind of how SRI and SAIC both run. And so whether or not or what other connection SAIC had, I don't know, beyond just that kind of a relationship with a remote viewing program.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I also want to ask you, there are lots of references that are made to the fact that there was funding that was strategically cut for the remote viewing program, and there are references to the Collins elite. And I know that in an interview that George Knapp did with Harry Reid, Harry Reid was mentioning a group of conservative Christians, from my recollection, that were responsible for cutting that funding. Have you heard? Does anybody mention the Collins elite, or who?
I've never heard that term, but I've heard the claim that it was evangelical Christians or conservative Christians that undermined the remote viewing program. I actually don't believe they were a big influence. Much more an influence were people who were skeptical, the skeptical elite, if you will. Oftentimes at DIA and in the Army, in fact, people came along and wanted to cut the funding for the remote viewing program, not because of some religious grounds, but just because they didn't believe in it, right? They didn't think it was something the government ought to be doing, or they were actually skeptically disinclined. So, I should have reviewed my research. So there was the General Odom is his name. General Odom was the Army Chief of Staff for Intelligence at the time that the Army divested itself of the remote viewing program and passed it on to DIA. And Odom was a self-declared skeptic on all of this stuff. And in fact, he was a kind of a thorn in the side of the people who were trying to keep the remote viewing program running in the Army. But unfortunately, he was also the senior intelligence officer in the Army. So he's not a good enemy to have in that setting, right? And so he did everything he could get away with to try and undermine the program. And when it came to closing the program down in the Army, he actually was instrumental in bringing that about. Later on, ultimately, when when the Congress tried to send the program to the CIA, the director of the CIA was, I always forget his first name. I think it's John Deutsch. He was famous for getting into trouble as the CIA director for mishandling classified information and stuff. But Deutsch, I know that is his last name, Deutsch, is famously a skeptic of remote viewing. Dale Graff tells the story of when Deutsch was, I want to say, Undersecretary of Defense, something like that. Dale had gone in to brief Deutsch on remote viewing, on the remote viewing program, which was under his purview. And when Deutsch found out what the topic of the briefing was, he essentially canceled it and kicked Dale out of his office because he didn't want anything to do with it. He was like a nuclear physicist or something in his original training, and he was a very hardcore kind of a physicalist kind of a guy, and didn't really believe in remote viewing. So you had these kind of people making decisions about the remote viewing program. Were there some Christian evangelicals who were biased against it? Oh, maybe. There was one case, one of congressmen who was on one of the select committees that was overseeing the program during the Army days. There was a fairly credible story that I think it was one of his aides was very opposed to it on religious grounds and may have had an influence in some of the funding cuts and stuff. But I don't think it was a majority thing. I think it was more the skeptics that were the problem, not the religionists.
Okay. And thank you for clarifying that, because again, it's one of those things that you can, especially in the UFO community, you can create so many links to things and then it's helpful to kind of to look at things factually and all of this is just, I can't tell you how much I've learned from you. This is amazing. It's really important. And so tell me, because we're getting ready to close the show, and I'll let you go enjoy your fabulous Friday evening. But
it's The Mandalorians, the new episode of The Mandalorian's coming tonight, so we got to watch that.
What is that?
The Mandalorian? Oh, you don't have a TV.
No.
It's a Star Wars spin-off that's really well done.
Oh, cool. What channel is it on?
It's on not CBS. It's on one of the pay-per-view things.
Okay.
Which one is it on? My son always brings it up, and I don't remember. But you can find it really easily just by searching for The Mandalorian, and you'll find all the information you want about it.
Well, that's good, but I need new material, because I'm telling you, this COVID stuff, you can't go out and hear live music anymore.
You want some suggestions?
Yes.
Go for, have you watched Person of Interest?
You know what? That's been around for a while, hasn't it?
Yeah. It's on Netflix.
Okay.
And it's really good. I really enjoyed it. We're watching Blacklist right now.
I love Blacklist.
Yeah, so you've seen that. There's Mandalorian. Of course, you've probably seen Stranger Things.
Yes, that's an interesting show. I like that.
It is quirky and bizarre and really kind of cool all in one thing. I don't know. I'll have to think of some more. But yeah, if you haven't seen Person of Interest, you'll especially love the dog. But we won't go there. I won't spoil it for you. So.
Well, I love it. So tell us, hopefully, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And at some point in time, we're going to get over COVID, or we'll at least learn we'll be adapting with the vaccines coming out and all of that. But when are you hopeful to start in-person learning again?
Well, it all, of course, depends on the vaccine rollout. And I'm not a vaccine denier, but I am a little cautious. As I tell people, I never buy the first model year of a car, right? So I'm in a way kind of glad that there's going to be a few months to see how other people fare getting this thing, just to weigh the advantages, disadvantages. But the way it looks like it's going to roll out, I wouldn't be surprised if I'm able to do live training again in March or April. That can change depending on circumstances, but that's what I'm looking at. And in the meantime, if folks want to try some training on their own, I do recommend my book, The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing, to get started. But I also offer a home study course. It's based on DVDs for reasons I won't go into right now, but it's called Remote Perception, Basic Operational Training. So it's essentially a distilled down version of my basic controlled remote viewing course. So 4 discs, 4 hours, but it's longer than that because there's exercise and stuff. But you can find that at remoteperception.com. Just those 2 words together, remoteperception.com. And that's a good way in a quarantine environment to get your feet wet in the remote viewing world. So
wonderful.
It's by the way, I should say it's on half price sale right now, which I didn't know. Somebody else told me it was on half price sale. So
that's awesome, though. That's great. Yeah. I mean, that is good that people can get their feet wet and then they can come down when everything calms down and go to Cedar City and have a beautiful, experience down there because it's just absolutely, as I mentioned, some of the most remarkable scenery in the world.
It's gorgeous down here. And I actually use that landscape in my training. There's some things that I can do here that I couldn't do in Austin thanks to the landscape. But you'll understand when you come to take the class. I realized I don't think we ever said my main webpage, which is rviewer.com. So the letter R in the word viewer. So rviewer.com. So you can go there and find out all of this stuff. So.
Wonderful. And it's just been really delightful talking to you. We kind of went from one thing to another, and I love that. It's just fun to see where conversations go, and I look forward to seeing your artwork. So now that we've got downtime, get on it because watercolor, and I have to ask you, I mean, with your watercolor landscapes, like what are some of your favorite techniques?
Well, I mean, watercolor is watercolor. I mean, there's lots of little tricks you do, but I usually do those intuitively. I don't know what to tell you. I do like to work on 300-pound paper.
Okay. A
lot of people work with the lighter grades, 180, 240, whatever it is, and that stuff's just too fussy. It's worth the added expense, and 300-pound paper is pretty expensive, but it's worth the added expense to gain the control and the color holding capability of water, all the different things that heavier paper do. It doesn't buckle. You don't get weird pools and stuff with color. And I just love 300-pound paper. So
thank you for that. I needed that because I am going to get up, after the show tonight, I'm going to get my watercolors out and go to town. It's a lot. It's, at least I can clean up after myself as compared to oil paints, which, I've got oil on the door handle to the fridge and on the floor. And it's just.
Well, that's the beauty of watercolor is it's a lot less, it's harder to control than oil painting is, right. But it is a whole lot more flexible than oil painting is in cleanup and setup and all that.
And that's a good thing for someone like, me, because I'm telling you, I'm a little bit messy, but thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to having you back on the show because I knew this was going to be a great conversation and it absolutely was. So thank you so much for being here tonight. And you stay safe and have fun. And for everyone out there listening, I want to just, again, thank you for supporting UFO Classified. Get the information out there to as many people as you can. Please be safe and have a wonderful weekend.